Greetings, everyone. Welcome back to Building the New World. We're in Sector 10, our first session in Science and Technology. And it's my pleasure to introduce Jerome Glenn. Let's fix the video there for a second. There we go. Okay, my pleasure to introduce Jerome Glenn. Jerome is a futurist who serves as the executive director of the Millennium Project, an organization that evaluates 15 global challenges to the future of humanity. Through the project, he consults governments, organizations, and corporations about his forecasting methodology, as well as on other issues such as defense and technology. He authors an annual Millennium Project publication called State of the Future. Jerome graduated from American University with a BA in philosophy and from Antioch University, New England with an MA in teaching social science, where he created a futuristic curriculum. He's also inventor of the Futures Wheel, a new method of brainstorming about the future, plus he coined the term futuring. Jerome has been the executive director of the American Council for the United Nations University and the deputy director of Partnership for Productivity International. Jerome was also the SynCon coordinator for the Committee for the Future with Barbara Marx Hubbard and a founding partner of Future Options, one of the first futures consulting firms. Jerome helped to craft the section of the SALT II Treaty in 1979 that prohibited the USSR from deploying its fractional orbital bombardment system. In 1983, he created CarryNet, a computer network that introduced data packet switching to numerous countries in the developing world. Jerome believes that horizontal organizational structures are more effective than vertical ones, stating that such human cooperation is necessary in order to create collective intelligence. So Jerome Glenn, welcome to Building the New World.
Thank you. Nice to be here. I'm going to be talking about if humans were free, a scenario, the self-actualizing economy that we did as part of a study on the future of work and technology. And that's available for you if you're interested on our website. We had three scenarios. One sort of a business as usual scenario, one that didn't look so good, and a third one that did look good. And this was the one that did look good, humans self-actualizing as a way of life. Now, if we can go to the next slide, a lot of people, when we did this study, were of the notion that, look, every new age, these people say it's going to replace work. It's going to replace people's jobs. And every age, from the agricultural age, the industrial age, the information age, every age, there's more work than before. So there wasn't this big unemployment stuff. So what's different this time? Well, I find that there are 7 things that are different this time. One is the acceleration of change. And people keep thinking that the amount of change over the next 10 years is the same as the last 10 years, which is not the case. And the acceleration of change means it keeps accelerating, right? So the acceleration of change means what we think is impossible becomes more possible than we thought. That more and more acceleration seems to be the foreseeable future anyway. Secondly, the globalization, interactions, and synergies among new forms of technology is new, that wasn't around so much before in the past. The existence of a global platform, when we went to the information age, the industrial age did not have the internet. Well, today we have the information, we have the internet, which means that it's a platform through which we can share technologies much faster than we ever could before during the industrial age. And in the, as I mentioned, as I mentioned in the introduction, I helped get packet switching into countries. Well, I'd have to get in a jet plane, get out of a jet plane, talk to some people, and it took a while for anything to happen. Whereas now you can do it with the keystroke, worldwide sharing of information simultaneously. That didn't exist before the internet. Also, we have standardizations of databases. And protocols. We did not have that before, which means that there can be much more collaboration. Take the COVID research on the vaccine. We're doing a lot of collaboration worldwide because we have protocols and standardizations on protocols that can fit. So that's also a change. 5, we have plateaus in the past. Like, for example, in front of me is a little laptop computer. My first laptop computer was 1992 or so, and it's a little bit nicer, but it looks similar. So I got used to it. You have an innovation like computers, but then you have a chance to plateau and get used to it. So we've been in this sort of laptop world now for 40 years. We've gotten used to it. Yes, more capability, but it's still a laptop. With artificial intelligence, you don't have that plateau. It just keeps going and going and going. So it's hard to get used to something and plateau. There's billions of empowered people in relative economic freedoms, which means that more people can create their own way than ever before. Machines now that can learn how to do your job better than you do your job. So those are 7 factors that can change the job situation that we did not have in the past. And it's reasonable to assume that a lot of jobs will be lost coming up. Now, next slide. At the same time this is going on, we've got the concentration of wealth is increasing, and the COVID situation is increasing that. The income gaps are widening, and COVID is also increasing that. Employmentless economic growth seems to be a new norm, and return on capital is usually better than return on people. Much of the future technologies coming up are designed to replace human labor. That's what they're designed to do, much of it. So long-term structural unemployment is a business as usual forecast. Next slide. We did a study. I won't go through all the details of it, but ended up with these 3 scenarios. Now, and which you can get off our website. Slide number 5. There is an important point here. Is to make a distinction. Next slide. On the we got the brain. There we go. There's 3 kinds of artificial intelligence, and when we did this study, the first thing we did was to read everybody else, not everybody, but a lot of other studies that other people had done on the future of work and technology. And I was shocked to see that people did not make a distinction on the word artificial intelligence. They talked about artificial intelligence as if it was a single thing. It's not. The artificial intelligence we have today is narrow intelligence. It has machine learning, and it does it better, and it's better and better, but it's still narrow intelligence. The AI, narrow AI that drives a truck cannot diagnose cancer. The artificial intelligence that diagnoses cancer cannot play and win Go in Korea. So that's what we have today. The second kind is artificial general. These distinctions are important because there's too much confusion going on in this conversation, and I wanted to sort it out first. The second kind is artificial general intelligence. Now, we don't have that yet, as far as I know. There's a lot of competition between major powers on this, so maybe they're closer down the road than I know. Classified stuff is usually ahead of other things sometimes, so they may be further down than I know. But the second kind, artificial intelligence, we may never have for sure because it's very difficult, but I think we will. And if we do, some people say it could be available in as soon as 10 years, maybe 20 years, and some people say maybe 70 years, and some people say never. But in any case, as your friendly neighborhood futurist, part of my job is to say, here are possibilities coming up. So we looked at the possibility that artificial intelligence could happen in, say, around 15 years, between the 10 to 20 years. Artificial general intelligence is like you in the sense that it can address a novel problem by contacting other artificial intelligences, sensor networks, Internet of Things, artificially call up people on telephone, robot telephone calls, and so forth. Just like you do. When you have a new problem, you think and you contact different people, you do different things. Artificial general intelligence does that. So it's not bound by a narrow purpose. It's a general purpose, like you are a general purpose intelligent being. The third one is artificial and super intelligence, is artificial general with a big difference. It is able to set its own goals independent of human understanding. That's what science fiction is warning about. That's what the big hoopla is about. Now, why is that? Why are people jumping up and down about it now? Because we don't know how long it'll take to go from general intelligence to superintelligence. It could be immediate. It could be years. It could be never. We don't know. But if we don't get the initial conditions right for how general intelligence evolves, then some of those science fiction stories may be true. Next slide. Now, in this slide, you can sort of digest it later on. It's not just artificial intelligence, be it narrow or general. It's a whole lot of technologies that are going to be affecting jobs. Take synthetic biology. Synthetic biology, you might be able to make an organism that rolls, it's spherical, micros, very small organisms, that sort of pick up dirt and then are programmed to go to a certain corner. So when you leave the office or your home, you take a little bit of this little powder thing, put it in the corner, and then at night, and then the next morning, there's a pile of dust on the other corner. No vacuum cleaner, no vacuum cleaner salesman, no vacuum cleaner parts, no advertising for vacuum. I mean, there's a raft of unemployment that comes out of that one little device. So it's not just artificial intelligence, it's also all these other technologies too. And I did a computer search on every study on the future of work and technology I could find, and put in the search for synthetic biology. Not one study, when we did this a couple of years ago, not one study had any discussion of any impact of synthetic biology. I mean, that's just staggering. Not to mention all the rest of these things. So we have to look at the synergies among all of these things. Next slide. Because the synergies is what's happening. Right now, we tend to think of each technology as its own thing. And we try to forecast what the capability of the technology is, what its impact might be on jobs and so forth. Well, but that's not what's happening. Next slide. What's happening is the integration of technologies. You know, who would have figured out a while ago that the future of a calendar would be a video screen, or that a video screen would be an alarm clock, or the future of an alarm clock would be a word processing system. I mean, it's the synergies and relationships of these things, the technologies. That's where the new wealth comes from. I mean, making new wealth is putting things in new combinations that people value. Well, that's what's happening more and more. Or the next slide, you can even imagine it like a Rubik's Cube, sort of mix and matches different technological capabilities. Or the next slide, where maybe you can sort of braid all these things together into new capabilities. So we ended up with 3 scenarios. These are detailed scenarios. They're not like your usual scenarios. A lot of people today will take 2 uncertainties, like let's say COVID vaccine works, COVID vaccine doesn't work, low economic impact, high economic impact. So you get 4 little cells of uncertainty there. And then they'll say, in these futures, this is what happens. Well, but that doesn't tell you how they got there. A scenario is a story that connects a present tense to a future with cause and effect links that illustrate decisions. That's not what's done in a lot of these superficial scenarios that just describe an endpoint. The key is like, how did these things happen? How did they evolve? So we have these 3 detailed scenarios. Each one's 10 pages or so. There's a lot of meat for you to chew in this one. Now, I won't talk about the first 2, but the third one, this is the one, if humans were free. A key element in evolving into this nicer world, or building a better future, is that governments did anticipate the impacts of artificial general intelligence. Right now, they don't make the distinction. But in this scenario, they start to make the distinction and start to prepare for it. They have studies, they figure out how to phase in different changes and so forth. What are the early indicators? How are they going to, what are they going to do? How do they get ready for it? They conduct extensive research on how to phase in universal basic income. The idea here is we have a social contract today that says you go to school, you do well, you get a job, You do well in the job and you retire, and you're paid for your retirement. That's the contract. Well, so what happens if 15 years from today, you did go to school, you did do a good job, and you did do what you're supposed to be doing, but you get automated out of it with artificial general intelligence, and you're thrown in the street? It's not your fault. Do we want to have a society where we start to throw people in the street all over the place? I mean, that's not a very nice world. And again, the narrow intelligence you can kind of prepare for, just like the automated truck drivers. You know, the robot trucks are not going to replace all the drivers tomorrow morning. It's a phased-in process. You can prepare for it. You can get ready for it. You can forecast it, but not general intelligence, because general intelligence cuts across the system, so it's much harder to prepare. So your unemployment rates, when artificial narrow intelligence gets more going, it starts to go up. But when you hit general intelligence, it can jump, and governments won't be stable if it jumps like that. And that's your scenario 2, which is if you have friends that are too optimistic and you want to bring them down to earth, read them, give them scenario 2. That'll sober them up. And if they're too depressed, then give them this scenario, because this is more better. They have increasing intelligence becomes a goal of ministers of education across the world. When we were much younger, we believed that the brain was a given, that whatever IQ you had is what you end up with. You couldn't grow new neurons. That's it. Your brain is it. You can't change it. Well, we now know you can. We're learning a lot. As a matter of fact, if you want to have fun, do a Google search on 2 words: increasing intelligence. Enter, and then follow the links, and there's an awful lot of stuff going on. We know how to increase intelligence, but we're not doing it. I've never met a teacher that could tell me what they have learned from cognitive research that they can apply to a classroom about increasing intelligence. You just didn't made the connection. The future is not going to get less complex, but more complex, so we're going to have to be more intelligent, and increasing intelligence is a reasonable thing we can now add into education. Because after all, we have physical education to make you healthier and stronger. Why not brain education? Why not? Because we're educating a brain. We're not educating a kneecap. Also, self-employment becomes something to promote. In the past, being self-employed, working at home, means you couldn't get a job. And it was socially looked down on. It's beginning to shift a little bit, especially with COVID. Working at home is sort of the way to go. And also in this scenario, another variable between this one and the other 2 scenarios is that artists and media moguls and entertainers help foster cultural change from an employment culture to a self-actualization economy. Right now, your value, your self-respect is defined by essentially your boss. You are an economist working in Virginia, or you are this working there. So if you're unemployed, you have less value, you're down, you're gone, right? So we have to get the idea that that people will have to be more self-assured, more confident that they can evolve themselves, and what we think is important is often given to us through the arts, through movies, through television, through music, theater. So all of the arts in this one starts to get serious about promoting the idea of creating your own life, inventing your own life. Self-actualization is cool, which right now it's not. It's again, your identity is with an employer or somebody else. Slide number 13. Now, even in this optimistic scenario of self-actualization, we figure that only about half the workforce, which is quite a lot. The workforce in the year 2000 was about 3,000 people. 3 billion people. No, year 2000. By 2050, 50 years later, we figured it'd be about 6 billion. May have 9 or 10 billion people, but the workforce maybe like around 6. So we just use that as an estimate. And so in scenario 3, you still have about 1 billion people living and working sort of in a similar way we do today. You have a boss, you have an organization, and you're employed for doing a job. And these are the things that are sort of running the basics of civilization. But then in this one, we have self-employed about 3 billion. We have unemployed or in transition about 1 billion, and 1 billion in the informal economy. The informal economy is 65% today of the world. So getting it down to 1 billion is a big shift. It sounds like a lot, but that's a lot of improvement. So, informal economy simply means that you're not registered in any way, and you're making a living day by day out in the streets. And these are the unemployed, not unemployed, but these are the people that will have a very hard time with the COVID virus because they can't stay at home. They stay at home, they starve to death. They have to go out in the streets to do whatever living they are in the informal economy. And they can't afford masks. I mean, they can't do all those things. So the spread of COVID in the informal economy is going to be gigantic coming up. So number 14 slide next. So as we know, I suspect that most of the viewers in this conference already know who Maslow is, but applying this to society as a whole is interesting. You take your physical needs. If you go back to 1981 or so, more than half the world was in extreme poverty. Didn't have the access to water, safe water, and electricity, and all that sort of stuff. Half the world. Well, since 1980, we've added a lot more people, several billion more people, but less or fewer than 10% of the world is in that extreme poverty position today. It'll go up maybe 700 million people or so because of the COVID, but it'll come back down again. So it'll be a bell curve. But the point here is that we are meeting our basic needs as a civilization, as a world species, far more than we did before. Our safety needs are better than we had before. More and more people have all kinds of safe environments that they did not have before. Even in Africa, where I was a Peace Corps volunteer, you felt relatively safe going from one tribe to another. But not too long before that, each tribe was selling each other into slavery into Saudi Arabia. So some of the and safety in urban environments is obviously improving as well. Now, love and belongingness, well, we may be not getting that as well as we'd like, but social media is, in a sense, fulfilling some of those needs and self-esteem needs as well. So it seems that the direction of civilization is toward self-actualization in any case. Next slide. Now, in this world of advanced technology and self-actualization and all of this, the distinctions between physical reality and artificial reality will blur. You're walking down the street, you can see all these sort of different things going on at the same time. You put it on contact lenses and it communicates with the internet with you. So you're hands-free, phone-free, laptop-free, AI-human symbiosis. That seems to be a pretty straightforward projection that we're moving in toward. So you'll always be connected. You'll be involved in the global system much more than you are today. Next slide. Now, some of you may know this, that you can do a Google search on what's called Neuralace, which is the device, and the company is called Neuralink with Elon Musk. And I think it was last month you can do a Google search on Neuralink pig demonstration and hit the video, and you'll see that they had put in the brain fibers that are so small that an individual fiber is connected to an individual neuron. Musk had to invent a whole new manufacturing system and a robotic implementation surgery system to make all this work. Now, I'm not saying that this is necessarily the way of the future or that I want, but I'm saying that these things are in motion. Why? Go back to the three kinds of artificial intelligences. If we don't figure out how to get along with artificial intelligence as it evolves, then if it goes to super, then it's over there and we're over here. And then those science fiction movies are plausible. But if we evolve together with it, like the charged couple devices, the contact lenses and so forth, we slowly evolve together. I'm not saying you got to have the technology in the body. You might have it just in your clothing on your body. But the more we are integrated in a humane, healthy way with the technology and evolve together, the more likely it is that we will evolve with general intelligence and superintelligence, and therefore not have those nightmares that people talk about. The first application of this may very well be with paraplegics. You know, the people who break part of their spinal column. The brain can't send a signal down to the legs or the arms, or the same vice versa, can't go back up to the brain. It's broken. So you put one of these little devices on your head, and another device down by your hip or so, and they just jump over the break area. So this will be sort of how they'll make their money and make progress. But eventually, many people will probably want to merge with the technology that Elon Musk will eventually evolve over years. This is just a beginning. Other people will be doing this as well. Just like the early internet stuff did not have too many people involved, and then now everybody's involved. Number 17. However we do it, whether it's contact with the brain directly or on the outside, like a hat or clothing or outside, the idea of the noosphere evolving, Teilhard de Chardin talked about how all this gets together eventually. Well, we still seem to be moving in that direction. The internet is getting more intelligent, and the human interface is getting better and better and better and better, so that we'll sort of evolve, I think, in this way. Now, at the same time, so will robots. Robots are going to be integrated with all this sort of stuff too at the same time. So we'll be connected to the cities, we'll be connected to robots, we'll be connected to, hopefully, our own avatar. Slide number 8, I sort of left you there. I should jump to 18 and then jump on to 19. One of the things in the scenario 3 of the self-actualization is that slowly but surely, we can build up a little AI avatar that knows our interests, our behaviors, and so forth. So eventually it could go running around the internet while you're sound asleep, picking up things that you'd like to do, some that you'd like to do just because it's cool to do it, and some you'd like to do because you have to make some income from it because it's part of your self-actualization activity. See, work becomes like a reaction math to evolution. Like the more you're doing this, you're rubbing it. It's like in physics, you have to have a reaction math. So the work is helping you evolve, helping you become more self-actualized. And the avatar can help you do that, your assistant. This, one way or another, does seem to be the way it's going. Which means that you could make a living each day in a new way. So that, let's say the avatar wakes you up in the morning and it says, okay, there's 50 things that you'd like to do today. 25 of them are just for fun, and 5 of them are going to earn you all kinds of income. I've used their little blockchain smart contract. All you have to do is approve. Once you approve, the contract is made. So that each day you could be inventing what you are doing for income, which is also the same thing as what you would be doing for making yourself more self-actualizing. So you'd make a living out of being yourself and evolving. Number 20, if you look at very successful people, like these 2 guys here, Steve Jobs and Bill Gates, they'll tell you they followed their passion. I mean, almost every interview I've ever heard with a very successful person, they'd say almost the same thing. Anyway, they were self-actualizing. I mean, who is me? I'm not going to copy somebody else. I'm not going to fit in. I'm going to do something unique. All right. Well, if you have more and more people able to make a living out of being unique, and you have an education system that promotes increasing intelligence, and you have contacts like the contact lens, why wouldn't the whole population become a bunch of geniuses eventually? For example, when you take an IQ test, you have to fill in a bunch of stuff. And if you get a certain score, you're a genius, right? Well, if I got a contact lens on and it's recognizing the words and coming up with the answers simultaneously, why wouldn't I get 100%? Almost irrelevant. Now, what did I do here? Let's see. Certainly makes the IQ test of running my little slides here not too good. Anyway, so imagine if you have people who are augmented geniuses. Now, they're not necessarily biological geniuses, although hopefully we can improve the brain a bit enough, but they're also augmented with this technology to make us more intelligent. So behaviorally, we're like a genius. So if by 2030, 2050, millions, if not billions, of people could become augmented geniuses, what kind of a world could that be? Now, if we're back in the old competition nation-state game in some nasty games and so forth, that could be pretty dangerous. But the more people are into self-actualization in the economy, and the more they're so busy being themselves, what do I got to give you a hard time for? I mean, I like what I'm doing. I'm evolving. I don't care. I don't want to give you a hard time. Why? It slows me down. So it's a little bit utopian, I acknowledge, but it's a trend forecast that many will become augmented geniuses. That's a very likely future. Slide 21. I'm not going to read all these things out because I'm hoping we're going to be able to get to some question and answer stuff pretty soon here. But just to click on some of these, where these suggestions came from was after we wrote the scenarios, the 3 scenarios, we gave them to the Millennium Project nodes. We have these nodes around the world. A node is a group of individuals and institutions that connect local thinking and global thinking together, the global local stuff. So we sent them out to everybody and said, all right, would you have a national workshop, and the idea was that the people in the workshop should read the scenarios first before they come in, and then they can throw them in the trash can. So it warms up the discussion. Like, all right, if all these trends are real and these are real possibilities of unemployment coming up, what are we going to do about it? Concentration of wealth is going on, and all that stuff I talked about is going on. What do we do about it? What do we do about it? Are we going to sit there and have our society fall apart? So there was easily 300 suggestions made from these workshops around the world. Many of them, of course, were the same. So we got rid of the overlaps and condensed them down to about 93 actions. Now, pause. When we did the first review of the studies, this first phase where we reviewed other people's studies, most of the studies really never said what to do about it. They simply says, here's the problem. In those studies that did say, here's a solution, they said STEM education, science, technology, engineering, mathematics education. Well, out of that 6 billion workforce in 2050, how many people are really going to be able to make a living out of those areas? Probably not that many. I mean, is savvy to be good and understanding that sort of stuff? Yes. But how many people will make a living out of that at that point? Not 6 billion people, I don't think, which means you still have to do something. So these workshops around the world divided into groups. There's a group on government, and a group on business, and a group on culture and arts, and a group on education, and a group on science and technology. So then they had answers for each of these categories. Then we took all those answers and condensed them down, as I mentioned. Then we did 5 separate questionnaires, what we call a real-time Delphi, 5 separate ones around the world. So for people to evaluate the actions and say, is it likely? Is it going to have much impact? And explain yourself, which gave hundreds of pages of text, which still had to be condensed down a bit. And it's in the report, this work technology report you can get online. And it's the most detailed analysis of what to do about all this stuff that's been done. And not even a close second. I mean, we literally analyzed 93 actions. So here's just a couple of ones that I just picked out, unscientifically, my own sort of preference. Make increasing intelligence an objective of education. In parallel to STEM education, create hybrid systems of self-paced, inquiry-based learning for self-actualization, creativity, critical thinking, human relations, using new AI tools. Pause. Most of our education systems are teaching us how to fit in. They don't teach us how do we connect with what we're interested in doing around the world. The original idea of the information revolution has been a little bit forgotten. The old idea of was the marketplace was a center around which you revolved. Physically, you had to walk to it, and that was it. Now, a revolution, like the Copernican revolution, is the center point becomes the outer skin. In the center, you change the center point with the outer, right? So every individual right now has more than half the world revolving around them. Now, that's a fact. That doesn't mean you're able to access everybody, of course. But we're not taught to think this way. And we're not taught to think about how we connect with the world, on which will be interesting to us to evolve with. We're taught how to fit in, which is okay in an industrial society. A little okay, but less okay in an information knowledge society, but it's certainly not okay in a self-actualization society, because you don't need to compete with somebody else to be yourself. But you can, in elementary school and middle school and high school going up, you can being taught, how do I use this global technology to connect with just the people and the things that are really important to me for me to evolve? That should be part of education as well. Produce alternative cash flow projections for universal basic income to see if, when it is financially sustainable. This was another big learning. One of the values of writing a scenario is you find out what you don't know. And so when I put in scenario 3, the basic income idea, I had to explain financially how it's going to work. And so I figure, okay, well, let's say Switzerland's been looking at this, and Finland's been looking at this, and Canada's been looking at this, and other people around the world have been looking at this. They've got a cash flow projection. I'll just see what they got. Nobody, repeat, nobody had a cash flow projection that I could find. I even had a meeting with the Prime Minister's office of Finland because they're doing an experiment on the thing. And I said, gonna do a cash flow projection? They said, yep, we'll send it to you when it's done. I said, great. 6 months later or so, I'm back in Finland, meet with another part of the Prime Minister's office and said, where's the cash flow projection? We haven't done it yet. Report that they were working on the same report that used our stuff for it, a report going into the Prime Minister the following year. I met with the Committee for the Future, a very cool thing in Finland. They have their own Committee for the Future that sets the agenda of what's important for the other committees to work on, which has helped Finland get out of the debt or the financial fall that they were in after the Soviet Union went down. So did Finland went down. So they had to reinvent themselves. They reinvented themselves with this Committee for the Future. It still exists today. It's a very good thing. I recommend every country to have one. Anyway, so I was meeting with them and said, there's no cash flow projection in there. And they said, well, we in the parliament, because the Committee for the Future is in their parliament, get to comment on it to the Prime Minister. So I said, good, can you ask for cash flow projection? They said, yes. Still no cash flow projection. To this day, I do not have in my possession a cash flow projection to show that guaranteed annual income is financially sustainable. I'm not saying it's not. I'm just saying I don't have the evidence. So we did take a look at various forms of new income and when it might be more sustainable. And there's 2 curves. They're abstractly done. They're not done with real data yet. And that is, you have new forms of income. Like, for example, you can tax a robot. You can tax synthetic biology life forms and so forth. So as you have new incomes going up, that's one curve. A second one is the cost of living, because when you pay guaranteed income, you got to give somebody enough to keep them so they're not thrown in the streets, right? Not much, but just so it's a basic. How much should that be? Well, right now it's a certain level. But what are you paying for in, say, 15 years? You go to a hospital, or you go to your computer screen, and you get diagnosed through a artificial intelligence program. Well, it costs a lot of money to put that together, but then every use of it is not another cost. And a lot of systems are happening like this. That it's like when I produce a book and I print it, it costs me so much per book. But if I put it online and you download it, one person's cost is not the same cost for me for the next person who buys it. It doesn't cost me any more if 100 people buy it or 1,000 people buy it. So there's reason to think that a lot of these technologies will reduce the cost of unit, especially because you're also taking out human labor. You take human labor out of the production sequence, you reduce your cost, which means you can reduce your price over here. So it's reasonable to draw another curve where your cost of living is still going up and then starts to go back down. Like I'm willing to bet that a college education will not cost the same amount in 30 years as it does today. We're finding that bell curve may have already been reached in the university area. But other areas will have the bell curves, and you put them all together. So you have one curve if going up on the income, another curve on the cost of what you have to do is starting to go down. Where that crosses over roughly, we think is somewhere around 2030, 2035, which turns out to be really lucky because we think that's when the first time we have to really worry about artificial general intelligence kicking in. So the capability of making it financially sustainable and the requirement to have it, we may luck out. We may luck out. Now, last slide, 22 there, is, I touched on this just briefly. It's one of the gaps in all of this, and that is the evolution from artificial narrow to general, how well that goes. We don't have any governance system for this. Imagine that we didn't have the International Atomic Energy Agency. We probably would have had at least dirty bombs going off a lot around the world. Dirty bomb is some nuclear material put in with other explosive material and blows up. So it's not an atomic bomb in the usual sense, but it's enough to totally disrupt a city and bring an economy down to a crash. We have been saved by such standards, in my judgment, but we don't have an international governance system for artificial general intelligence, nothing, very little for artificial narrow intelligence. Now, it may take 10 or more years to create such a system because it's, international meetings take a long time. You got to go around with treaties and so forth, and then finally, designing a system and ratification, and then building it and then having an established system. 10 years to 15 years is not unreasonable forecast for how long it would take to create an international governance system for artificial general intelligence. So we got to start working on it now. And if anybody knows who wants to help get that done, let me know. We have contacted a variety of organizations, and we hope to do this. We just finished up the Red Cross scenarios for COVID, and now we wanted to work on this one next. So maybe in about the next couple of months, we'll start trying to go in that direction. It was mentioned that I had worked with Barbara Hubbard. One of the things I would like people to know is that in the early days, you had the Rand Corporation, Hudson Institute, and others that kept to themselves. I mean, a think tank was like, a fortress thing, and because of the Cold War, it was mostly classified stuff you're given to the Pentagon. Barbara was the first, and with John Whiteside, were the first really to open up think tank world to the general public. The SynCons was a participatory process that people could come in and think all the things that think tanks think about, but in a public way, with television forecasting, television transmission, and feedback system with telephone. We really open up, and it's a great thing that she has done. The Millennium Project, in a sense, carries on that tradition a little bit, in the sense it's a global participatory system through these nodes around the world. Next slide. We call it trans-institution. Trans-institution is a new institutional concept. It's the idea of cutting across the institutions. And that cutting across is a new kind of an institution itself. So the Millennium Project got created this way. We started under the United Nations University, and evolved out to be independent. But we had some governments, we had some universities, corporations, NGOs. So the idea is, you create an organization where your board of directors, is all of these things, or as much of them as possible, but not a majority of any one. The people who do the work are from all these institutional categories, but not a majority of any one. The money comes from all these categories, but not a majority of any one. And the value added through your State of the Future reports or other things we do has value to all of them, these categories. So the interesting thing is that when we recommend stuff, it has to make sense to the bottom line, because business is there. It has to make sense politically, because government is there. Has to make sense with values, because the NGO is there. Has to make sense to knowledge, because the universities are there. It has to make international sense, because the UN or some international agency is there. It also means that we can act through these categories. So when we do a future of work study like this, it goes through universities and taught in classes. It goes in corporations and their strategic planning. It goes to NGOs and some of the values and directions that they're going into governments, like, as you saw, government policies, how they get ready for this, and into the UN. We haven't had the impact on the UN on this. I don't know. Oh, yeah, we did. I take it back. The ILO, the International Labor Organization, changed some of its early planning just before its anniversary that it had because of this sort of stuff. So slide number 25, this is where we have some of these nodes around the world. And we've already begun to create regional systems. Like in Latin America, we have what's called REBER. That's all these nodes together. So they make a system as well. So there's nodes connecting local and global. Then the regional of these nodes so they do regional studies like Latin America 2030 and so forth, and they initiate themselves. Then we also have one in Europe, Foresight European Network. It also does some collaborative work and gets the European Union to fund it. We're in the process of creating one in Asia, and one may be coming up for the Arab world. We haven't, there's an early talk for Africa, we haven't done that yet. But the idea is to have these, so imagine the evolution of management with this. Regional management's a hierarchy. The boss is up here, everybody else is down here, and information flows up and down. Then we create these networks of like-minded people. So it cuts across the hierarchies, but they're like-minded people. Better, but nevertheless like-minded. So then what we do with the node is an intersection. Like in our nodes, we like to have somebody from each of these institutional categories, like a miniature trans institution. So a node is like the intersection of different networks, which causes more fertility and reasoning and thinking than would be the case if it was just a network. Then we put these networks into combinations of fields of play, which is what's being done now. Then eventually we'll have the fields of play connected up. And at that point, I retire. And I think that's most of what I should say here. Let's see, what else we got here? Yes. And the last couple of slides here just tells you some of the stuff that we've done. We got a State of the Future report, which has some of this stuff. Next slide after that is methods. People sometimes will say they do scenarios, and we do them too. But we listen to here 37 different methods. There's an introduction and a conclusion, but 37 different methods. There's no one way to look at the future. There's no one way methods to do it. So we put them, a lot of them here for people to take a look at. Next slide. And this gives you a way of somebody saying we've done a lot of different things. So we try to do accumulative research so that each study informs the next. So our work technology stuff informs what we did on the COVID scenarios. And some of the stuff, the COVID scenarios and work technologies, maybe inform what we do on the artificial general intelligence stuff. Next slide. And that's the work technology. That's a full report on what I was just talking about. And then we put all this stuff together in slide number 30, which is a collective intelligence system online, where we have both the methods as well as the research, as well as ongoing updating of 15 global challenges in different ways. And the last slide tells you where you can get all this sort of stuff if you're interested. And now we can open up for some questions.
Great, thanks very much, Jerome. It's really enlightening. I'll leave the slide up for a few moments so people can get this information down if they want.
And they can have the slides group. There's no ownership here. They can, if anybody wants it, you
can
share.
We'll post this file in the group, and then people can download it for sure.
Sure. Okay.
So we'll go to our first question then. With augmented genius available to the quote unquote haves, won't the have-nots become obsolete except for menial jobs? In such a transhuman era, won't the result be two classes of humans?
Right. And that is a big issue. That's a giant issue. That is a giant issue. And it's one of the things on our list that we'd like to study, how to prevent the prejudice between the two houses. You've got imagine you're running an organization and you are supposed to evaluate how well they're doing. Someone's augmented and the second one's not augmented. Is that fair to evaluate the same way? I mean, there's gigantic complexities in your question, which I acknowledge, and it's real. However, having acknowledged all that, not that it's easy to get over it, but having acknowledged all that, anytime you have an innovation, you have a gap. There's no way to create something new without saying everything else is old. So you have a gap. I mean, that's the way it is. Now, we have ethics, hopefully, that we deal with that in an ethical way. But you can't innovate without creating gaps. Now, secondly, when we were first started with the internet stuff back in at least my part of it, back in the 80s, early 80s, I actually had people telling me, I know this is going to sound funny, what do we need computer communications for? I have a fax machine. I'm serious. I had to listen to that for almost 10 years. Secondly, the French would say, which they don't anymore, but they did say, this is a form of American hegemony. Well, now there's 3 times more people in China using internet than in the United States. People talked about the digital divide. Not so much anymore. Why? Because the majority of people have internet. You know, it's moving and moving and moving. And COVID is going to be, this virus is speeding this up because of the teleeducation, telemedicine, the everything else is speeding it up. So the idea of the haves and the have-nots is real. It cannot be swept under the carpet. But there's reason to say it can be addressed, as we have with internet. Nobody in France says this is American hegemony. Even I was in UNESCO one time, and a person said, well, it's just a normal way of the future in Paris. It's just the way it is. It's no longer an American thing. So the idea of augmentation, I suspect that the little devices, like right now, my ears are augmented by this device. My mouth is augmented by this little, wherever it is, here we go, speaker, right? So I am an augmented human being right now. I'm a mini cyborg, not a very fancy cyborg, but I'm a mini cyborg. Okay. I suspect that in a similar way, there'll be simple augmentation systems that people will have. I showed you the contact lens thing that's being worked on right now. I think you can even buy them in Korea at the moment. So the prices, I don't know what the price is, but I'm sure the average person not going to have it for a while. Just like the internet, the average person did not have the internet to begin with. So I suspect that eventually the whole world will be able to have access, if anybody wants it, to augmented intelligence. Increasingly, access to internet is considered a human right. Not everywhere, but increasingly, it's beginning to say you should have a right to have access. And I don't see why augmentation wouldn't be a right eventually as well. The price will come down. I mean, it's like anything else. I mean, when I created internet, CareNet down in the third world countries, we charged for accounts. But the price comes down. Like how many people pay for their email address? I mean, think of how much software you get. I mean, I think somebody did a study. You could probably do a Google search on this. Think of Google, by the way. Back in the 1980s, when we were first cooking up computers there, if I said, you'll be able to ask virtually any question and have that question searched through billions of computer pages, not millions, billions, if not trillions of computer pages, organize the response just for you the way you've been searching before, and give it to you in a second at no cost. They say, you're a very nice young man, but you don't know anything about economics or technology. And now we do it and we think it's normal. We just think it's normal. You know, Google has made the expression, I don't know, obsolete.
Yeah.
Think about that.
Yeah. You just a quick follow-up on the gap that was
Yeah.
asked in the question.
Yeah.
Tying it back to your early point about everything being accelerated, is the time that the gaps get filled become accelerated? The time that they close, is that part of the acceleration?
I would certainly assume that. I haven't sat down and gone through the gap on the smartphone and the gap on each one, but I would assume that.
Yeah.
I would assume. I mean, the thing with Elon Musk is going to take a longer time, and that's getting pretty fancy. That'll take a while, I think. But the contact lens approach, I could see that going very fast. I could see that going. Yeah, I mean, if the contact lens thing gets down to, let's say, $10 to $20, and you've already got your internet access anyway, and you got voice recognition for your password and the rest of it. Boy, that's better. You don't have to remember all the damn stuff with having to type in. Oh man, that's terrible. So I would assume that the gaps would be closing faster. Yeah, I think that's a fair assumption. I just don't have any empirical proof that that's the case.
Sure. The next question here, do you think banking will be tied to technology in the future such that we can be easily cut off from our money by the government?
Well, now, there are others that know much more about this, but it does look like various forms of, I mean, even I think China is now creating its own independent, it's not cyber, they're calling it digital currency for transaction activities. But I think that the idea of independent systems will probably increase. I mean, you've got already the various cryptocurrencies and bitcoins, and you got transfers of money going down to Venezuela without the normal procedure where somebody comes up, they exchange your Bitcoin thing for actual cash. So a lot of this experimentation is going on now. But power systems on manipulating one way or another people that are against those power systems, that's a tug of war. I'm a little less optimistic about some of that. I'm just hoping that we can a lot of the power systems that we have today, as you know, are reactionary. And I am hoping that the following analogy with history works. If you take a look at the Renaissance in Italy, before the Renaissance, all things great and glorious were not Italian, not even the language. It was Greek. The statues were Greek. Everything was Greek, and you had to use Latin. If you're a serious person, you didn't use Italian, for God's sake. Well, sooner or later, it dawned on people: hey, we're not Greek, and I want to write in Italian. And bingo, we got a Renaissance going on. Now, I'm terribly oversimplified all that, so the historians in the group will be annoyed, but the general drift is there. It's understandable that when a people run into something that they don't understand, like the rapid technological change, you look back over your shoulder. When were you safe? When did you feel okay? So the idea of you're reacting to what? You're reacting to change. Reactionaries are reacting to all this new stuff coming up. They think they're going to be left behind. I think that's got a lot to do with the Islamic terrorism. Because because we got to make a distinction between modernization and westernization, and we make that distinction, we can have a real conversation on this. But in the meantime, we haven't done that. So I'm hoping that power systems increasingly will move toward an eventual renaissance of power, and that individuals will start to understand. Like, for example, Stephen, can I borrow you for a second?
Sure.
Can you are you right-handed or left-handed?
Right-handed.
Could you put your right hand on your head? All right, and you put it back down. Thank you. Now, my apologies for this exploitation. But that's what power is. You tell people what to do and they do it. Now, when you had masses of people under the king would say, do it, and they more or less did it. Well, as they got better educated and have more access to things, it's harder for the dictatorship of the king to win. So we have sort of democracies evolving along the way. Increasingly, we're getting more intelligent and have access to more and more stuff that I'm talking about here. So the individual has become far more powerful to act than before. Well, that changes power. Now, Exhibit B. The original organizers of power was religion. Then nation states on top of religion didn't replace religion, but created a new kind of power on top of it. Then along came the corporations, a new kind of power on top of the governments, which was why we were having the little argument between governments and corporations today, right? But then eventually, a new kind of power will be the individual power on top of the corporations. Now, what is power? As I said, very simply, it's you say do X and X occurs. You have the power. Now, as people have more and more augmented intelligence and all these other sort of things, you say, hey, I would like to do X. And because you're inventing yourself, you do X. You have power. And you're using corporations. Like I use corporations for credit cards, and I change depending which I'm doing. So I'm making the decision. I make the decision. I have the power which corporation I'm going to use. Well, in the old days of the industrial dictatorships before, you didn't have you had Standard Oil, and that was it. No choice. So I think there's reason to be optimistic, but there's not reason to go to sleep, so to speak.
Here's a follow-up question, somewhat related to the previous one about what other Big Brother scenarios are possible and that worry you?
Well, I'll tell you. Oh boy, these are questions of ethics. There's a classic question of futures ethics. On one hand, you want to warn people. On the other hand, you don't want to have self-fulfilling prophecy. All right. So I am struggling about what the hell to say, but I'll give you some general stuff. Organized crime on a global basis altogether makes twice as much money per year as all the annual budgets of all the militaries of the world combined. Did you know that? Organized crime is the big 100-pound gorilla or 500-pound gorilla in the futurist room. People don't like to talk about this. Organized crime, if you take all the military budgets of the world, put them together, it's around 1.6 or 7 billion or $1 trillion, 1.6, 1.5, somewhere around there, $1 trillion, the T. We figure organized crime is somewhere between 3 to 4 trillion. And other people have make a similar estimate as well. And that doesn't even take into account the things you can't count. Like, for example, if someone, says, you do this or I cut off the horse's head and put it in your bed. Yeah. Well, there's no money transaction there. So it didn't go in the GDP of crime, right? But there's a lot of that. It doesn't count. All right, now, organized crime knows how to launder money. It knows how to make shell corporations. So it means it could create a system or a set of systems to attract the best computer programmers in the world. And they could be working for organized crime and not know it. And that is a gigantic worry.
Yeah.
In fact, when I talk about artificial general intelligence, what ought to be done in the world political situation, and I list the players, I include organized crime as a player because they got the money to do it. Now, this goes back to the ethics. Do I want to push that and reinforce it? Do I want to create competition within organized crime to come up with the best strategies to get the best work? I don't want to do that. But here I am answering the question a little bit. Yeah. But it's a serious problem. Now, there is a global strategy to address organized crime that you can find in Global Challenge 11, I think it is, or 12, on the website of the Millennium Project. You can find that. And that's in process of this discussion with different countries. And the weak point at the moment is that we need the International Criminal Court to deputize courts in countries. It's a long story. I won't get into it, but organized crime is not a crime against humanity in the International Criminal Court, believe it or not, because they have a problem with definition and all that sort of stuff. When that gets ironed out, then we can implement a global strategy to drastically reduce organized crime and its effectiveness.
Sure.
But that's one of the big things I worry about.
And there's some versions of that happening even today. I mean, I was reading something about how local newspapers, because they've sort of been decimated, now there are self-interested, narrow-minded, let's say, organizations that are creating local news, but then hiring people as quote unquote journalists. But the bias is it's so lopsided. But people who are contributing to these things may not necessarily know that, because they're
absolutely. Well, take the whole idea of information warfare. The whole idea of information warfare is you don't know you've been attacked. Propaganda, you know, it's out there. Cyber security, cyber attack, or usually But information warfare, you're manipulating information flows like what Russia did on the election in 2016, and when they want to have plausible deniability, they outsource it to organized crime. What percent of the banking system cash in Russia is organized crime? More than 1%.
Let's go to our next question.
Oh, so to finish up, I would say one of the other things I'd be worrying about is the idea of global paranoia. So, because information warfare can be done not just by one country, it can be done by others. If you want to replace some head of state or whatever, you outsource to organized crime. You say, worth how much is it? And you pay it. And then the corporations might start to do it. Others may start to do it. So we could have such information manipulation that the truth is and if you don't trust lines of credit or information flow, that makes you behaviorally, not biologically, but behaviorally paranoid.
Yeah.
And that's another thing I worry about as well.
Yeah. And I'm not sure what the linkage is, but I'm like, just before we get to the next question though, because going back to like the different types of AI, and because I was thinking about, like, I was going to ask you, how does developer bias impact general AI? We know it impacts narrow.
Yeah. That's why one of the big jobs of the future will be AI auditors. Just like you have financial auditors auditing businesses, you want to be able to say that your AI is as good as an audit can do. And if we don't even have that together for narrow AI much yet.
Right.
But I'm stuttering because the complexities of these things are just almost too much to explain. We don't even have the terms for these things yet. It's like in the early internet days, if I had said, well, someday in the future, Facebook will help organize a revolution in the the Arab Spring. No one's going to understand what the hell I'm talking about. Right? Because we didn't have the terms for it. A lot of this stuff we don't have terms for yet. So I'm stuttering in the meantime.
There's a question, different topic. What are your projections on displacement due to climate change?
As in like water?
Or population, I'm assuming.
Well, okay. Yeah. Okay. I forgot. I think it's something like over half of humanity is within 150 miles of coastline. I think that's something double, but something like that. Now, so you got two things. Not only you got the water going up, but you got the salt water creeping into freshwater areas, which means that Bangladesh's agriculture is doomed. So imagine half of humanity around these rims, so to speak, having to move in. All right. Now, historians will tell you that when people migrate from one place to another, if they're migrating to a place where there's no people, no problem. But if they're migrating to a place where there's people, problem. Take Syria and then take Italy. And you see what I'm talking about. Or Poland. So, climate causing mass migration is not only inevitable for the water, it's also inevitable for the desertification. And you've also got the water tables are going down, which would be going down. It's not one-to-one correlation with climate change because it was going to be going down anyway because we got more water mass on the surface now because of all these people. But when the water goes down, when the water level goes down enough, and you can't get the water up the next day, you have to move. You have no choice.
Yeah.
So you got water on the coastline making an effect. You got water underneath the ground making an effect, and you got desertification making an effect. So yeah, we used to do the environmental security reports for the U.S. Army years ago, and environmental migration was on the top of our list of things to plan for.
Next question from the social stream: is human cloning taking place, to the best of your knowledge?
One, I don't know, and two, I'd take a bet that it has. Imagine if you are the first person to do it. How many people want to kill you? And even if they don't kill you the first day that you're born, maybe somewhere along the line somebody kills you.
Yeah.
I mean, the first sheep in Scotland was how many years ago was that? Quite a few years ago.
Right.
Yeah, I'd suspect that somebody in Switzerland has a quiet laboratory that may have done some cloning already. I think they've already done this for pets. Where your pet dies, they take part of the cell and you recreate your pet again. Yeah. But I would suspect that we won't know who the first ones are. That they'll be afraid to be killed.
Yeah. Our next question from the stream: do you believe Earth will be federated in the future with planetary democracy and a binding world court to resolve disputes?
Well, you could say that that's a trend projection. However, one of the things I've noticed in my few years of doing this sort of stuff is that whatever you look at it turns out to be more complex than you thought. I mean, the example of the future of the camera became a calendar or an alarm clock. It's more complex than you thought. I did design sort of a world court in the book Future Mind some years ago, which had different players. It was a first use of a trans institution, actually, I've written about. And the idea that the court would implement from its own category, the business player could do this business implications on trade with the person. The government could do a certain and think of how a court can be more complex than we have today, and then double it. But when you said a planetary federation, I thought you're talking about the interplanetary federation of Star Trek or something like this. I said, oh, good. Now we're going to go out into space. Let's talk about that. Yeah, that was one of Barbara's main thrusts. But you're talking about, well, we have a world court today. We have an international criminal court today. They're not, I think the word was asking about binding. They're not binding. We actually did a study on the future on the International Criminal Court. It's also on our website somewhere. And because it was believed that the International Criminal Court would hold U.S. military forces in court and screw up warfare. And we showed that was not the case. That wasn't possible because there's a whole bunch of steps that you go through to do the criminal court. And there's checks and balances along the way. It's a complex system already. But it's not binding unless nation states cooperate. There have been, some heads of states that have been put away by the International Criminal Court. But there's a lot of criminals that are still walking the earth. Yeah. Do I think that'll happen? I think it's something like it is inevitable, but how it works itself out, I suspect, will be more complex than I understand at this point.
Our next question from the audience: in your opinion, which sector on the wheel, and I'm going to assume they mean the wheel of co-creation, will benefit the most from science and tech, and which may be harmed?
I can't see the whole wheel, so I can't. So I get out of that question. Maybe I give it back to you. But by the way, my general philosophy on this sort of stuff, without knowing all of the stuff there, is that if you can tell me which is more important, the heart or the brain, then I can answer your prioritization question. We've been doing these 15 global challenges, another version, not exactly like the wheel, but it's similar in the sense of like trying to cover a lot. And people say, well, which one is the most important? And I keep saying, no, you can't do that. They're all. It's like every part of the body counts. So I would throw that question, Stephen, back to you. Take a look at it, and maybe I can do a commentary on your comments.
Yeah, well, I mean, it reminds me, though, the question reminds me of what you had said earlier about moving from an employment culture to a self-actualized economy, and how the arts are so essential.
Yes.
Yeah. And my question about the self-actualization, particularly in light of the emerging technologies, is, do you think self-actualization itself is a technology?
It depends on what your definition of technology.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, a fork, some people will say that's technology.
Sure.
Although because we used the word high technology so many years ago to mean this information technology, and now people just took off the word high and they refer to technology. It really kills me. Someone says, well, the technology companies versus the industrial companies. Yeah. Industrial companies are using technology too. Come on.
Right, right.
So it depends on what you mean. If self-actualization is a tool of self-actualization, it's recursive, then I would say sure. What is it? We use computer software to build computer software. We use computer hardware to build hardware. I guess maybe we'll use self-actualization as a tool to self-actualize. Because you have to believe it's possible. If you don't believe such a world is possible, you're not going to give it a try.
Right.
So belief in it might be the tool more than the thing itself. I'm not sure.
Okay.
But I'm not sure I answered that question right.
Okay. Well, we'll say good enough for now.
Okay.
The next question from the audience then: who do you think is behind organized cybercrime, quote unquote, organized cybercrime?
Oh, a whole flotilla. I'm not much of a believer in a pyramid structure on some of the stuff. You have corporations do cybercrime on other corporations in the sense of espionage. There is a thing in California whose name escapes me, in Silicon Valley, that's set up by the CIA to keep track of what's going on in Silicon Valley. You also have countries who have offices in Silicon Valley, nation-state offices to keep track of it. So they're spying on each other there. Cybercrime, I would say one of the biggest ones, probably in the volume of impact, would probably be China, I would assume. But people invading. Now, of course, you got cybercrime that steals. You got cybercrime that disrupts. There's a different kind. Then you've also got these new things about, you either do what I say and send me a bunch of money, or I, unlock your. So there's a lot of different categories of cybercrime. But so certainly organized crime is a big player, and so are nation states on spying. But that's not necessarily destroying, unless you count taking over a White House as an attack.
Yeah. So I'm just going to have a little bit of fun with this question for a second. Is there anything in terms of innovative that organized or cybercrime has done that the mainstream has learned from and implemented in a generative, ethical way?
I was being called away there for a second. So try that again. Sorry. Is there some innovation? Is there a good side of cybercrime?
Is there an innovation that actually has been adopted by, the mainstream for a generative purpose?
Boy, I can't think of any other than maybe somebody changing. In other words, let's say that you're a hotshot hacker in the negative sense of the word hack. And you eventually say, I don't want to do this. I want to do something else. And you're bringing with you a lot of knowledge and a lot of skills. Yeah. Well, there is one thing maybe you could look at. The idea of viral attacks 15 years or so, 20 years ago, was a daily nightmare for most people. Now, when sometimes there's a problem, we say, get your congressman to do a law or something like that. We didn't with cybercrime so much. What we did is we said that you are responsible for your own antivirus software. So the work has been divided up among the public, so to speak. And then the businesses, of course, supply it, but the responsible actor is the individual. I am responsible for my security of my laptop. So I'd say one thing that's good about that is self-responsibility, maybe. That's a pretty weak answer, isn't it?
Well, but what's interesting about that answer is that actually now, like, there's antivirus software built into, let's say, Gmail, where I don't really have to worry about downloading attachments because Google's going to scan it for me. But I can be socially engineered through an email that I'm not smart enough to not click the link on. So.
Yeah.
Our next question is about Barbara. Barbara Marx Hubbard was not afraid of AI and hinted that it represents the next phase of our evolutionary process.
Sure.
Do you agree?
We were in completely agreement on conscious technology that will emerge. But another thing we agreed on is how good that merger will be depends on how well the technocrat and the mystic can get along. Now, we're all part mystic and part technocrat, as the culture is as well. And so the better we can get the synergy, there's that word again, the synergy going between mystic, the attitude of the mystic and the knowledge of the technocrat, if we can get that together, then that evolution, I think, will be fine. But if we don't, then I think we got ourselves a nightmare.
A question from the audience. Another futurist told me that Singapore is the international playground for cloning and other biotech experiments. Do you know how many secret labs exist around the world in Europe?
No, I don't know. No, I don't know. But I mean, obviously they exist. But I don't know.
In how widely? Like every country?
Oh, wouldn't think every country. They're expensive to put these things together, and you got to keep them secret. So it's a lot of people you got to deal with. But I don't think there's a mass movement of cloning humans in these secret labs, if that's what the question is. Is there some? I wouldn't bet against it. I wouldn't bet against it.
Okay.
Yeah.
The next question from the audience, the same futurist, which I'm assuming is from the question before, says that there are underground cities in nearly all countries where the elite plan to move if and when the shit hits the fan. Any insight on why governments are planning for crisis instead of building the new world?
Well, first of all, futurists are supposed to use data. We're supposed to count things. We're supposed to figure out what the meaning of those counting is. I don't believe that futurist did any data analysis of real empirical stuff. It sounds to me like a pretty paranoid view of the future.
I want to go back to something that you had said, because I think the distinction is worth a little bit of an exploration. Is that we have the idea of the ethics, the ethics of all of this development, technology development, high technology development. So there's bias, and then there's ethics, and there's the organized crime part of it. So do you think that there's maybe, like, what is the state of the ethical evolution of all of this?
Yeah. Okay. We got a good story. Unbeknownst to most of us, there has been a world effort, slowly but surely, participatory thing called the International Organization of Standards. The International Organization of Standards, ISO, the U.S. doesn't pay much attention to it, but a lot of the rest of the world does, any individual acting alone can go to the website, the International Standards website, ISO standards website, and there's a process that you go through. You say, I would like to have a standard, which ends up being a statement of values and ethics, right? On how you should scratch your nose. What's the most ethical way of scratching your nose? All right. So I can sort of put that together. And there's a whole process to go through, and it gets to a point where it gets to be evaluated and gets up to being a standard. Now, there's no enforcement power for that standard. But let's say that you are a business person and you go to India and you want to start up a business on scratching your nose. And they say, are you ISO compliant? And you say, no. And they'll say, oh, well, we're talking to this other company that's ISO compliant on scratching your nose. And so we're going to do business with them. That's the enforcement power. Now, that's an ethical system that's growing up slowly but surely from grassroots. We have ethics on how do you hire people, fire people, all that sort of stuff. These are all slow. It's a grassroots, bottom-up approach on global ethics. It's being put together right now with international organization standards. There's also been on our global collective intelligence system, we keep track of about maybe 6 or 7, maybe 10 of global ethics studies. There's even a global ethics institute up in Maine at one point. And UNESCO did one. We did one. We just a future of, what do we call it? I forgot what it was. It was a future of ethics, or the future of values, or the future of ethics, maybe it was. And we had questions like, do you have a right to clone yourself, for example? And we went through all these sort of things. I'm optimistic. I mean, the idea before World War II of a country complaining about another country's ethical behavior sort of didn't exist. Now people say, well, this guy in Saudi Arabia kills a bunch of people and nothing happens. Yeah, but there's an uproar. In the past, it wouldn't have even been an issue. I think the human species is evolving. And to me, that means all that sort of stuff about the self-actualization and ethics and noosphere eventually and so forth. I think that's true. But it's not inevitable. I don't believe in the inevitability of this. One of the things that makes me a little nervous is in the past, there's a science fiction theme. One of the science fiction themes was the reason you don't have extraterrestrial knocking on your door is because the technology to get interstellar activity is so powerful that somebody screws it up and ends a civilization. We call it CMAD, single individual massively destructive, CMAD. That's another study we want to do at some point on how to prevent that. But as technology improves in power and effectiveness and distributed and lower cost, that means that more people not only have the power to do good stuff, but more people have the power to do bad stuff too. So I just went down a very nasty rat hole in my brain there. What was the original question?
About the evolution of ethics.
Yeah. So I am hoping that we will not only evolve ethics, but then all these governance systems and all the rest of the stuff goes with it as fast as we possibly can. Because if not, the idea of a single individual acting alone, formatting the C drive of civilization, is an inevitable future.
Yeah. And yeah, sure.
And science fiction has sort of like talked about this. And sometimes they all burn out at some point. So hopefully we will do a better job.
Yeah, and with full appreciation for the ISO example, how does that? Are all bets off when it comes to individual innovation and power? Because now, like, people can do gene splicing in their basement or whatever, right? And they're not going to ask each other if they're ISO compliant,
right?
So
no, I understand. That's what I'm saying. Single individual massively destructive is a big deal. Yeah, it's a big deal. And synthetic biology is the point of the sword on this. Well, that's why we got to have conferences like yours and all these other efforts. I mean, we all have to do what we can. and we can maybe evolve okay, but
Yeah.
not if we put our feet up on the desk and say the hell with it.
Right.
That's the other thing. This pessimism stuff is annoying, because to me, pessimism is an intellectually cowardly position.
Mm.
Why? Because you don't have to prove anything.
Mm-hmm.
You just say, what's that? Why, you're not even using your brain. Whereas if you say, here's a possibility, you have to do what I did. Here's how these things can work. Yeah. That's an effort. You know?
Right.
So I think we should stamp out ignorant pessimism, because it's like poison in Hamlet's ear. Remember, when you say something not possible, it's telling the younger generation they should not try.
Right. Right. Yeah. And now the younger generation is saying, well, the hell with that, we're trying. Fortunately, I mean, many of them, right?
Yeah, that's another thing. I mean, I've had 300 interns over 25 years or so, and I would say the idealism is going up, not down.
Yeah, nice. Well, let's leave it on that positive note.
Okay.
Narrative note. And Jerome, thank you so much. Thanks for your wisdom and for just this wealth of knowledge and futurism that you've brought to the conference. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right. So with that, thank you, Jerome. Everyone, thank you for being with us. Stick around, or at least come back, I should say, at 7 Eastern. We have Robin Hanson from the Future of Humanity Institute at Oxford University, as we continue with our session 2 in Sector 10, Science and Technology. So we'll see you in a little while. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.